There are 254 town meeting members, 128 constitute a quorum. We're going to debate and we'll eventually come to vote.
So I ask you to support this motion.
I see no hands. Am I missing one?
Need the community these bring together.
I was an elementary school teacher.
I think we're hearing two separate issues.
Public art's been an important part of this community.
I urge you to vote yes on this proposal.
Call the previous question.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. No. We'll have an electronic vote.
I move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
So welcome back. We are on part 2 of remembering people who were important to town meeting and served our community for years in town meeting. And I'm here with Molly Turner and Frank Gaddy, and so happy to have you with us. And we were just talking about Larry Kelly, and I wanted to read something that from the newspaper. It's an article entitled "Amherst Welcomes Cleared Guantanamo Detainees." And perhaps you recall Ruth Hook, who we're going to talk about shortly, sponsored a non-binding resolution on behalf of the newly formed group Pioneer Valley No More Guantanamos. And the resolution urged Congress to lift the ban on allowing Guantanamo detainees into the United States. It also welcomed the men who were cleared of any wrongdoing to Amherst. And I thought this quote from Larry Kelly was a great quote. He says, "It's hard to define in Amherst what a conservative would be, but I guess I'm the conservative in Amherst." The article goes on to say that once Larry Kelly was assured that no town services would go to support the detainees, he supported the move. And here's a quote: "Because of all the things the flag represents, if these people really didn't do anything, then I have no problem with them living here." That's a good segue for us to talk about Ruth Hook, who brought this resolution. Again, this is a petition article, so she would have collected, if it's a Springtown meeting, she would have collected at least 10 signatures to get it on the agenda for town meeting. And then town meeting did indeed vote to support that resolution. And what do you remember about Ruth Hook?
Well, I remembered that she was a great peace activist.
Yes.
And I was, after 9/11, I was a member of Women in Black, where a few of us who were interested in the peace process, had been peaceniks way back from the 60s. We stood on the corner downtown and advocated against not Iraq so much, but Afghanistan. We went back that far. At some point, Ruth joined us. But she was doing a lot of activity with various people in the peace movement in Northampton. Like they would go on trips. They would go down to the training in Georgia, where they were training.
Oh, right. The School for the Americas.
School for the Americas. They would. She was always going someplace, but and she was very, very much committed. One of the things, the more colorful things about of the groups that she joined was the Raging Grannies.
Could you explain what they were?
Do you remember them, Frank?
What do you mean, remember them? They are active and involved right now.
They're active and involved right now. That's right.
They still exist.
What are they?
Yes, I mean, exactly.
And so what do
Well, they are what they sound like, which is they are
raging,
politically astute and interested, peace-oriented, elderly women.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how you define elderly, but
do they sing or
absolutely.
Oh, yeah, they had songs. They had all kinds of protests.
Performed once.
And they write their own music. That is, they take often traditional songs and they add their own lyrics to it.
Right. Yes.
And you often will find them, especially peace rallies.
Yeah.
And
they're still going. And
yeah.
Frances Crowe, and she was
she
was aligned with Frances Crowe in Northampton, so she had a lot of friends in Northampton who were doing peace trips.
Yeah.
Here and there.
Yeah.
What else do we remember? She was a town meeting member
for many years.
Yes,
many years.
She was,
and very active into her. I'm not sure
Oh, she was in her 80s.
In her 80s,
yeah. She was our age.
Yeah. And she lived in Applewood in her later years.
Yes, that's
And I
correct.
remember even there, she was talking to her neighbors about politics and,
Yes.
and campaigns, and elections are coming up, and she was going to help get people to the polls and tell them about candidates.
And one of the complaints that people would sometimes bring up about town meeting was that we had our own international policies.
That's
so,
right.
for example, the Guantanamo.
That's an international thing, and
and when you think
that's
about
where the
it,
Republic of Amherst comes from, isn't it? Where
Yes.
Larry Kelly's blog, and he says, like, where the Republic of Amherst. But yet, that's interesting that he actually supported this one, which was a resolution from the Republic of Amherst.
Right. Well, and speaking of crossover or cross-fertilization of ideas, this might be a good segue to talk about Harry Brooks and Paulette Brooks.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the Republican connection because they were married, and as you probably recall, Harry Brooks was the chair of the Democratic Party, Democratic Town Committee.
Yes.
Paulette was the chair of the Republican Town Committee, and they got married and had a wonderful relationship despite completely different politics. Who would you like to talk about first, Paulette or Harry?
I'd like to talk about Harry because
great.
I think it's important. I think one of the best things he ever did was when he was in select. He wasn't on the select board. He was on the board of select men.
Okay.
And he made a point of changing the name to select board because it discriminated against women. And that happened, it lasted. That's who we are, we're a select board.
Yeah.
And another thing Harry was always doing was he wanted accountability. He was big on accountability. And also Ken Mosokowski, who was his great friend, so we could probably get back to him. But they were always wanting a standing vote, so it would be recorded how people were voting. So but Harry wanted to increase accountability even more with some scheme of having machines to record
Electronic
votes.
voting.
Yep, electronic voting, which was, and then he was on the first board of town meeting coordinating committee.
You and I were on there with him.
Yes.
We were on the committee together. For those who might not know what the town meeting coordinating committee is, it's a body that's elected by town meeting members, and it's 6 people, or is it 8 people now? Anyway, it's a group of people who are elected whose task it is to improve town meeting. There's a suggestion box, you can give suggestions, and they host educational forums to teach town meeting members and the community about what town meeting does.
But the issues, they are very good about informing everyone, including the voters at large, but especially town meeting, about the issues with information sessions
and bus tours. Remember,
bus tours,
Harry and I worked on the bus tours year after year.
Yes.
He would do the maps, and I'd do the lining up speakers, and we would have the bus tour would go to all the different locations that were relevant to what was going to be voted on in town meetings. So if there's a piece of property that's going to be purchased for open space, if there's zoning that's going to affect a particular neighborhood, we would organize a bus tour, and we were a team on that, Harry and I.
I think it was 2004 when there was again a vote on a charter to replace town meeting.
Yes.
There were a lot of very specific criticisms of town meeting, many of which had some merit to them. And so a town meeting improvement committee was formed.
How long ago was that, Frank?
That was
2004, 2002. I can't remember what was the
like
first
time.
vote or the second vote. But what happened is that we got together, there were 7 or 8 of us, and Harry Brooks was on the committee, as I was, Chris Riddle, there were a whole bunch of us.
Yeah.
And we talked over a variety of different ways of improving town meeting. And the bus tour, the idea of accountability of a group of people that would meet between town meetings to try to figure out how to do the job better. But Harry, anyone who knew Harry, one thing about Harry was he was seen as reasonably opinionated and stubborn.
Yes, he was.
And when he got onto an idea, it was hard to dissuade him. And one of his ideas was we should have electronic voting.
Yes.
And among the rest of the committee, there was not so much opposition as, wow, that's a big deal, it's a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
There's so many issues we should be addressing.
It was, at that time, like $10,000 or $20,000 when I remember it first being talked. He was doing the research to find out how much it was going to cost.
Right.
And it's been a wonderful thing.
It's been, well, I don't, yeah, but I think there's some people don't think that, but I like the accountability. I certainly do. But
so for people who aren't familiar, we did get electronic voting. What about three years ago or so? And so anything that's controversial, in 30 seconds we have a vote with everyone's name on it. And all of that, by the way, if you want to look up how anybody in your precinct voted, you just go to the Amherst government website and go to the town meeting webpage, and go to the town meeting archive, and you can find every controversial vote with all the names on it for your representatives, so you can decide who you want to keep in power and who you want to vote out.
Yep.
Right, but before electronic voting, there used to be a recording of every vote, every controversy, every standing.
If there was a tally vote,
a tally vote, or a tally vote,
you had to have 15 people hold up their blue or red card. I admit I was always one of the wanted to get a tally vote.
And so was Harry, and so was Ken Mosokowski. They wanted to get the tally vote. It took time. Yeah. But Carol, you get to stand up.
That's true. That's true.
You can stretch your legs. And I miss that with the electronic voting. You get
you can't stand up.
You get cramped, right?
Yeah.
In town meeting, but.
And the interesting thing is that Harry prevailed.
Yes,
he did prevail.
With very loose support from the rest of the committee.
And he got to see it in his lifetime, because he was in town meeting for decades, I think. And you remember he always had the job of running around with a microphone to hand it to people. He and now Adrian. Anyway, and Nani, of course, running around with the mics. But
Aaron Hayden.
And Aaron Hayden, sometimes Jeff Lee. Anyway, but so Harry, even though he moved away for a time, and he and Paulette moved down to Washington, D.C., we'll get to that when we talk about Paulette. And then when Harry moved back after Paulette had died, he ran for town meeting again. And even though at this point he was having difficulty walking, and I forget if he was in a wheelchair or not,
I think he was,
but he still was coming to town meeting and loved it, really loved service. You know, when I was reading over the article about him, it discusses ex-Amherst official Harry Brooks recalled as social services advocate, and it talks about how he was on the Amherst Select Board from 1990 to 1993. And he was the chairperson for the town's Housing Review Board and Human Services Funding Committee, a town meeting member for more than 20 years, and retired operation researcher from Spalding Sports Worldwide. My husband knows him best from his runners circles.
He was a runner.
Yes,
he ran every day.
He was the past president of the Sugarloaf Mountain Athletic Club. And when I helped him and Paulette move from their house, Echo Hill area, he had a room with all these medals and javelins and like countless pairs of running shoes, and he just it was a big part of his life, running and public service.
And as he got older, he continued in his capacity as an official at track meets.
That's right.
So that as it became harder and harder for him to physically do things, he remained involved with running as a sport.
Yeah.
The other thing I remember about Harry is his being proud of coming from Camden, New Jersey.
Is that right?
And
I didn't know that.
The reason for that is that Camden is a relatively poor community. Known for poverty, known for crime.
Yeah.
And he struggled. Academics didn't come easy to him. He felt supported by the community of Camden.
Yeah.
And always had a fondness for this.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's interesting. I just also just really miss him as a friend, you know, and I have found that many of my good friends come from town meeting, and that's how I first met Harry. And, you know, with many of these people who've passed on, it's just been a really deep personal loss, too.
We also miss Paulette.
We so miss Paulette.
And particularly because of her work with immigration.
Yeah.
And it really would be nice to have her perspective now.
Absolutely. And Paulette, so Paulette was in town meeting for a shorter period of time,
yes.
But she was in town service for quite a long period of time. She was part of, I believe she was a chair of the community development group that would look over block grants, and she was on that committee with Isaac. So she, as I mentioned before, she was the chair of the Republican Town Committee. When she decided to run for town meeting, she said, "Carol, would you look?" We were friends. We were friends because I asked her to come speak to my American politics class at Greenfield Community College, and I wanted to have a Republican perspective, and she was my friend. And I said, "Paula, would you come speak?" She says, "Absolutely." So she'd come, and I remember our car rides. We'd carpool up there together, and she was doing immigration work, and she was really disturbed about what was happening with immigrants. And but she was so committed as an immigration lawyer that she'd take all these cases where no one could pay her. So she'd be talking about how, Carol, I'm actually on food stamps, but all these clients need my help, and I'm working nonstop, but no one can pay me. And I just anyway, she was just really inspiring. And then she gets tapped by the Obama administration. She goes from that position where she's helping immigrants who, I remember her telling me stories about Fitchburg, I think, is where she had an office, and she'd say, "Oh, they're doing these raids, and they're coming in the middle of the night, raiding these immigrants' homes, and it's just devastating." And she was working so hard and so concerned. Anyway, so she's going from basically a volunteer lawyer struggling to get by herself. The Obama administration taps her and asks her to come, and I don't know if she was heading up or at least one of the staff attorneys in the Ombudsman's office of the Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. And somehow they heard about her outstanding work, and so she and Harry packed up and moved to Washington, D.C. And it was really interesting. After she died, the department, the office that she was in, they loved her. She was only there for a few years, and she died really abruptly. I think it was a heart condition, just stroke, coming off a plane, I remember. Just out of nowhere, and so young, and her whole career ahead of her. Anyway, they gave this wonderful memorial service in her office in D.C., and I couldn't be there, but I conference called in, and we arranged for Harry to conference call in, and he was in tears on the call, and her colleagues were just raving about her, and they even dedicated their library in their office to Paulette. And they said, if any of you come, we have a plaque to dedicate our library to Paulette, and you can come see it. Anyway, one last story, a more upbeat story about, kind of funny about, so Paulette's running for town meeting, and she, because we were friends, she shows me her resume. She says, "Carol, here's my resume. I want to go knock on all my neighbors. I'm going to knock on all the doors in my precinct. I think precinct 6, right? I want to knock on all my neighbors' doors and take a look at this." And I'm looking through it, and I said, "Well, Paulette, I see you talk about chairing the town Republican committee." I said, like more than 90% of the residents in this community are Democrats. We'd really like you to get elected. And she says, "That's who I am, and that's part of me." And I know she felt very strongly about the abortion issue. Mm-hmm. It was a big one for her, for her identification, I think, for parties. Anyway, she canvassed almost every door, maybe every door in her precinct. She came in one of the top vote getters in her precinct. And people were so impressed. There she was, showing up at their door saying, "Hello, I'm running for town meeting, and I want to know what you think, and I want to represent you, and I just thought I should come and tell you who I am." And anyway, she was just so conscientious. And I don't know if you have other stories, but I wanted to share those.
You had started to tell the story. It's amazing who is in immigration law. very frequently they are wealthy attorneys. That is, they work with the elite people who are in this country from another country. And Paulette was such an unusual person because there's no one who she would turn out of her office.
Oh, yeah.
And she would give hours and hours to people's situations that she couldn't be reimbursed for.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to know where her heart was in
Yes.
regard to her Catholicism, it was not just her religion, but also what her religion meant in social activism.
Absolutely.
And the concern for the people who had no friends.
Yep.
The people, and these poor kids were really in desperate kinds of situations. They were rescued out of nowhere
Right.
and ended up in a foreign country where they knew nothing about it.
And her role in the town, I think, working with community development grants, was just a continuation of her really trumpeting the cause for the underdog and the people who were struggling. And we have so many people to talk about. Shall we move on to?
Yes. I thought
something
maybe
you wanted to talk
with this we should segue into Ken Mosokowski because
Oh, sure,
he was
that'd be fine.
so
Sure.
much a part of Harry Brooks.
We'll
I
get
mean,
back
they
to
were-
Otto later.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Go ahead,
Well,
Ken.
right.
And you and I are his children.
That's right.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, Ken ran, how many years, 40 years he was involved in Focus?
Yeah, from 1968
And
on.
explain what Focus was.
He was an anti-war in 1968. He was part of he was a student at UMass,
Right.
and he was part of the protests of the Vietnam War. And he had a program on WMUA.
Right.
And as a student, that program continued up until 10 years ago.
Until he died.
Yes, until he died, which was 10 years ago.
You were part of
And-
the team that continued it, right?
And a few of us who had been guests on his program
Right.
over the years, we decided we'd carry on because, well, you saw Ken in hospice before he passed.
Right, at Fisher House.
At the Fisher House,
Yeah.
and I think you had the message that he really wanted Focus to continue,
Yep.
and that was kind of what
and the-
spurred us on.
And the team that did it was you, Molly, and Frank, and Rob Kustner, and Ellie. And who else was
We
involved with that?
had somebody, trying to get a broader perspective. We had a person from north of Amherst, up north.
Oh, yes, Peter Trzynski.
Peter Trzynski, who was a friend of, he was an activist up in Leiden, I think it was, right? And he joined us, and Leo Maley.
Yep.
Oh, right, Leo, right.
Who was also, he used to go do conversations with Isaac.
Of course,
yes.
right.
So,
And you'd have a weekly show.
we had a
I've been
weekly
on it.
show, yes,
Numerous
many
times.
times. Yes.
Well, and what was amazing, I'm sure you experienced the same thing, is to do it once a month was exhausting.
Yes,
and he did
yes.
it every single week.
Amazing.
So we would split up, we
Right.
did it once a week, so that essentially it was just one of us every month or so.
Right.
And we were exhausted, and we used to say that all the time. How did he do that every single
That's a lot of
Sunday for all those years?
Yeah.
It's 40 years.
And just as an aside, I remember one time we were listening to Ken, Ellie and I are driving along, and we're listening to Ken, and there's clearly something wrong. He's kind of hesitating and he's reviewing what's in the newspaper and stuff. So I said, let's drop in and see what's going on.
Oh.
So he dropped into the studio, and what had happened is his guest hadn't come.
Oh.
And so when his guest didn't come, he always had something.
fill in.
So he had the Springfield Republican, and he was kind of reading articles over the air because
no dead time.
there was no dead time, right?
Yeah,
You didn't have dead time.
Yeah.
So we joined in and became guests without any preparation. And
that was great.
I mean, Ken was essentially unflappable.
But what a great community thing that you hear that he needs help on the air, and you jump in to give him guests.
Right, but he would say things like, whenever anything would go, he says, well, this is This is live radio, folks. This is what you get.
Happens.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And that's true. It was he kind of hung on to that ethic of that ethos of having live radio, and I always treasured that when we were doing it. I always said, yes, we're live, and we're different. When we're not like all the great automation that's going on. And of course, WMUA got more and more automated.
I loved how he always had the John Lennon Imagine song to start off every show.
Well, Ken was basically a peace protester from UMass, and he, according to Mary Wentworth, he thought long and hard about what he wanted to have for. I don't know when he started. For so many years, I don't know when he started putting on Imagine, but. He thought long and hard about it, and that's what it was. Because it was great, because it's long, and we would also often have several guests in order to get them, segueing from the polka show, and to focus was sometimes a little tricky.
The polka show.
And that was wonderful. That was such a good and beginning to the program.
I read that he also ran for town meeting at one point. Didn't get it, or sorry, not town meeting, but the select board. He was in town meeting for decades probably.
Also, the rest of you can't know this, but the fun of Ken with the polka show.
Oh, what was that about?
Well, first off, Ken's Polish.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so
Mosokowski.
Right, of course. And so he would get in, and he would get there early, and he would kibitz with Helen and Charlie, and they would kibitz back with him, and they would say words in Polish.
Oh,
and
fun.
You had to be there to realize the fun of it all. But that's how his day started.
And how long was Focus on the air, and how did it go off the air?
When we were there, we were part of community, student and community radio. That was what it was. But there was a revolution at the time where the students, a group of students felt that it should no longer be a community station, but a student station. And so we were dismissed.
Well, you carried the tradition on for a decade beautifully.
And the only remaining thing is the polka show.
Yes.
That's still community, which was a huge community input into they made that, the polka people made the station. They raised money and bought new equipment, and it's just a sad story.
And any other recollections about Ken in town meeting? What kinds of things would he speak about?
He and Harry sat together, and whenever anybody would...
They were facing the stage. They were on the far right, I think the second row back on the right.
Any proposition that needed a second, they were right there. Second, right? They would be very quick to get a tally vote.
Oh, that's right. The accountability was a big thing with
him.
And
it was a very big thing.
Semi-funny, poignant story. So he was dying, and there wasn't anything to do about it except hospice care, which was very helpful. I mean, they did a wonderful job of helping him. But when I was visiting him towards the end, one of the things he said to me is, "Now, what district are we in? Where do we fit in town meeting? And how hard is it to get elected from here?"
How
hard? He's in hospice and he's wanting to get elected to town meeting. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up. We have many more people to talk about, but I think we're towards the end of our time. Thank you for watching. We hope to see you at the next segment. Thanks for coming.